The First Mound Builders of Ohio. The First Mound Builders of Ohio were a group of human beings native to the ancient landscape. A group of human beings who called the great Ohio River Valley home. And not only called it home, they turned that home into a paradise. And proved so by creating their spectacular earthworks that we still marvel at today. They built these earthworks to honor sacramental characters, to honor their deceased loved ones, and to use as a tool to use in their trade routes, and possibly as a tool of political influence on other local hunter-gatherers in their areas. This is a group of human beings who left behind many different artifacts in the form of stone tools, flint-knapped spear-throwing dart points, and other spears and knives, smoking pipes, shell jewelry, and copper ornaments they acquired on their vast trade networks. And they even left behind things like stone tablets and, of course, the largest effigy earthworks in the entire world, the Serpent Mound. This is a group of human beings whose deep colonial times lore remains enshrouded with local tales. Tales that still echo into the chambers of the present. Tales of giant skeletons upwards of 10 feet tall and humans with elongated skulls being found within these ancient burial mounds. Fact or fiction is for you to decide, and something we'll delve into in the near future. But we like to keep fact from fiction as guaranteed as we can here on this channel. But nevertheless, for the sake of the video, the fact is that this is a group of human beings who undoubtedly inspire their descendants and other cultures many centuries into the future. And it was a group of human beings we undoubtedly still talk about to this very day. Yet, still not talked about enough, the Adena culture, a time period shrouded in mystery, because very little is known of what life exactly was like for them back in the days when they reigned their land over 1,000 years before Christ, and some speculate much later than that. The Adena culture's name even has a bit of mystery behind it. Not necessarily how it was assigned in our culture, which was given to it in the early 1900s by a farmer and archaeologist named Thomas Worthington, who named a large mound on his estate the Adena, after defining this culture by its burial practices associated with mounds and artifacts. Such a boring name origin, right? But still mysterious for the fact that they were most certainly identified and honored in some other way in Native American culture, as many modern Native American tribes share direct lineage with the Adena culture, and most of the Native Americans who came after them used their lands and mounds for centuries after them, all the way into colonial times. Adena is of course just a Western way of describing them. So who really knows, they could have been called Big Daddy or Grandpappy in some Native American tribes or cultures' language down the line. Some of the tribes that the Adena may have direct lineage to this day include the Chippewa, the Delaware, the Kickapoo, the Miami, the Ottawa, the Peoria, the Potawatomi, the Seneca, the Shawnee, and the Wyandot. That is an important time to stop and note that when I say culture, Adena culture, I don't necessarily mean a specific tribe like you're describing, say, the Shawnee tribe or the Miami tribe. It's not necessarily the Adena tribe, it's more so a time period describing a group of similar communities that eventually started practicing mound building and creating similarly styled lithic artifacts, as well as sharing other similar customs such as cultivating the same plants and hunting the same animals. And on top of all of this, they had a fairly fast trade network spanning all the way from the northern part of the Great Lakes and the upper peninsula of modern Michigan all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. There's even well-merited theories that we'll cover in this video a little bit and in other videos, more particularly talking about the possible connection between the people of the Adena culture and the infamous Mayan Empire, both of which started coming into power at around the same time. What we know of how the early Adena people lived is that they were mostly nomadic within their region, the Ohio River Valley. They lived in small mobile villages near water sources, mainly living off of hunting things like elk and the black bear, foraging for nuts and edible plants when they could, and relying on trapping methods such as noodling for fish or building snares for smaller game like beaver and woodchucks. And then sometime in around 1000 BC or so, they began cultivating native plants such as pumpkin, squash, sunflower, goosefoot, erect knotweed, and of course the infamous maize. This is probably what inevitably led them to eventually begin constructing their earthworks, and ultimately led to a civilization to begin sprouting. This was the introduction of agriculture, as it's much easier to survive and grow a family or tribe if you're able to come together with a surplus of food and resources when times could get tough because of hunting patterns or seasonal changes. It can also, however, be a detriment if these societies' peoples become too reliant too quickly, if they don't know how to deal with things like disease, inner turmoil, or they have an over-reliance on agriculture. Any of these or none of these could be a reason for their mysterious downfall or possibly assimilation into a later culture known as the Hopewellians, which we'll also delve into in a later video. Alright, so great. Before the Adena culture was considered a culture of any kind, they had small nomadic communities and families that lived off of hunting and gathering, and then eventually they started cultivating native plants. This agricultural presence allowed smaller communities to come together with larger ones, as hunting grounds are probably less contested due to surpluses of food being available. This allowed the spread of ultimately a culture based seemingly around hunting, seasonal agriculture, and earthworks. But before we delve any deeper, I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine yourself a Native American man, an Adena man more particularly, with a small tribe of family members you hunt and gather with. You're wandering your local forests. Forests you and your family have roamed for hundreds of, possibly even thousands of years. Wandering your forests, you come across a set of very similar people who seem to be making their way up the river. They seem friendly. They have beautiful ornaments and the most beautiful materials for their spearheads. They radiate healthy and well-nurtured, and you can just tell that they're well-fed and well taken care of. Something you only experience during certain times of the year. They offer to take you to one of their villages on their log canoe. You decide to venture with them down the river, and when you finally arrive at their encampment, you see a giant earthen structure in the form of a circle, almost 10 feet high. You also see the most people you've ever seen congregated in one spot. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people doing different tasks and making different things all around you. Laughing at jokes, dancing around the fires, moms yelling at children, dads cursing at their tools. They bring you to their medicine man, where he inspects you and does a ceremonial chant to make sure your character is pure. After the medicine man accepts you, they offer to take you into their commune for the season, showing you a small wooden structure you could stay in within the walls of the defensive earthwork. They offer you water and food. They offer your family a place to sleep and food as well. They ask you of your ancestral land and where you came from. They led you atop the mound, and as you gaze from its top, you begin to make out the landscape, and you're able to point and direct the general location of your ancestral hunting grounds. Land that you know like the back of your hand. They offer you an assignment as a lead hunter and a permanent residence with them and their people. They offer to teach you their ways of agriculture and mound building, and in return, you take a band of their hunters, now your people, and teach them of your lands, establishing a relationship with your mapped land and their mapped land, creating a people's land. While in their village, you also happen to see a beautiful death ceremony, nothing like you've ever seen before for a village elder. This ceremony touches your heart and everything in your inner soul. Seeing someone be so revered and honored, even in death, opens your eyes to the beauty of your brother and sister of the lands. Realizing you want this for your afterlife, and you want this for your family, you set off to your ancestral lands with your new friends in search of the perfect place to begin settling your own bustling village, just like the paradise you've witnessed today. It was at this very moment you have officially become an Adena man. Now, I want you to try and keep this scenario etched into your head when we're talking about this next segment, the Earthworks, because this is a perfect scenario to explain the political power or significance that the mounds and these defensive earthworks could have played on the psyche of these hunter-gatherers. So, probably the most famous earthworks of all, said to be built by the Adena, is still highly debated in the archaeological community if the Adena actually built it in the first place. And that earthworks is, of course, the infamous Serpent Mound here in Ohio. Now, you can check the official website and what it has to say about who built the Serpent Mound, and that is this. In the late 19th century, Harvard University archaeologist Frederick Ward Putnam excavated Serpent Mound, but he found no artifacts in the serpent that might allow archaeologists to assign it to a particular culture. Based largely on the nearby presence of Adena burial mounds, later archaeologists attributed the effigy to the Adena culture that flourished from 800 BC to 100 AD. This theory on the site's origin was accepted until a 1991 site excavation used radiocarbon dating to determine that the mound was approximately 900 years old. This would suggest that the builders of the serpent belonged to the Fort Ancient culture, spanning from 1000 AD to 1500 AD. In 2014, another team of archaeologists presented new radiocarbon dates for the Serpent Mound, suggesting that it was in fact built by the Adena culture at around 300 BC. More work is needed to clarify the age of the Serpent Mound. And this is coming straight from the serpent's mouth, guys, the Serpent Mound's website. So do with it what you will. And for the sake of the video, we're going to go ahead and say that the Adena culture built this spectacular earthworks. Now, many people have speculated over the years that the Serpent Mound and many of the other earthworks were built upon over many generations. And this would absolutely make sense in the case of the archaeological data that seems to pop up when dealing with the excavations of these mounds. Though still technically theory, it's widely accepted to be true, especially if you add in the context that these people were still mostly hunter-gatherers at the time of their construction. Agriculture was still a new way of life at this time. We'll talk more about this when we discuss the downfall of the Adena culture, because it could very well play an important role in telling that story. What we do know of the Serpent Mound, however, is that it was some sort of ceremonial center or religious place, as there was no known artifacts excavated from the site, and there were signs of ancient fires being lit as to signify some sort of ceremony. An interesting fact about the Serpent Mound has to do with its location as well, and could very well have to do with why the natives built it in that location. Serpent Mound is actually located within a known meteor impact crater that happened over 300 million years ago, now called the Serpent Mound impact structure. And it's said that the natives built it possibly because of the geography of this landscape, or I think it's because of an ancient magnetic field that exists within this impact crater that affected the weather in this area and still affects it to this day. There's an excellent video breaking this topic down more, and I will leave it in the description and the comments of the video so you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But essentially, storms, and this is according to local farmers still to this day, are less effective in this area, meaning that storms seem to sort of avoid this small area and disperse around it due to the magnetic fields from the ancient meteor impact. Now, at first thought when hearing this, it may sound like some wacky pseudoscience or pseudo-history, but when you actually delve into this stuff, it's surprisingly true. Meteor impacts do cause magnetic fields, and those magnetic fields are known to affect the weather. This is a topic we'll cover more on this channel pertaining to the Serpent Mound and its effect on Native American lives. Now, I have personal theories that the Serpent Mound was used as some sort of birthing ceremony, possibly some sort of season ceremony honoring a season change. But the Serpent Mound truly does deserve a video in and of itself. Other earthworks were believed to have been defensive walls or a marker of territory of some kind. And what I mean by marker of territory is there was obviously more than likely some type of warfare amongst communities over hunting grounds or trapping spots. But that was probably later when they started competing for trade routes more often. I imagine for the most part the natives during these times, especially ones local to one another, were just people, just trying to survive. And anytime they came across another human being or tribe of human beings, they were probably delighted to meet them and trade with them or learn from them or even just congregate with them. So these defensive structures could have been some sort of political mechanism developed by more thriving communities to drive other communities into a center place. As they say, the more the merrier. I believe some mounds, and even more likely the effigy mounds, also served as a similar mechanism, but a defensive structure especially signifies strength and safety from predators and dangerous outsiders, which was probably very comforting in those times. Shoot! They're comforting in these times. Some mounds are believed to have multiple use cases, such as being defensive vantage points, burial mounds, and this one's pretty interesting, but to also use them as ancient lighthouses alongside the Ohio River and its tributary rivers. They would use these mounds as a network for long-distance communications where they would light fires on top of multiple mounds, giving them insights and advantages to traversing their lands, and possibly marking different important zones for trade. They could have very well had a very vast network of these mounds, especially considering how vast their trade network really was, and how influential the mound building culture was for the Mississippi and Ohio River people. There may have been thousands that have been lost to colonialism or other native cultures coming in and destroying them alongside the Ohio River, the Mississippi River, and all of their tributaries. Now, there's a great example of archaeologists using Adena-built mounds to test this theory by lighting a fire atop of mounds along the Great Miami River, a tributary river of the Ohio River near Dayton, Ohio. There were only 3 mounds involved in this test. The first in Trenton, Ohio, called the Great Mound. They lit a fire atop this mound and were able to see it from the next in Franklin, Ohio, called the Hill Kinder Mound. And then finally ending at Miamisburg Mound in Miamisburg, Ohio. This is a very interesting theory, and I think it holds a lot of merit, especially when you factor in their vast trade network. They were able to see for over 11 miles with the different kindlings lit at the top of these mounds. Pretty incredible for an ancient man. Now, burial mounds, I do believe, played a significant role in the religious sacrament of the Adena people. In fact, that's hard to dispute with some of the artifacts that have been found within these burial sites. Burial mounds, I do believe, played a significant role in the religious sacrament of the Adena culture. In fact, it's pretty hard to dispute with some of the artifacts that they have been buried with. Now, of course, it's all speculatory, but I do believe the burial mounds in particular had 2 functions. One, of course, being the religious one, and the other of which was more of a practical one, and they kind of touch on one another. So the religious one is more of an affiliation with the afterlife in some way by honoring the dead with ceremonial burial rituals. And I do believe they also buried their people at important sacred communal areas as a way of signifying the territory and their ties to the land ancestrally. Probably a water area that they used, or a hunting ground that family would have hunted for hundreds or even thousands of years. Or maybe it was an important seasonal agricultural spot they used. Nonetheless, it's a marker of territory of sorts and a way of saying, hey, this is our homeland, and this is where we can return to when we need to. Because you gotta keep in mind, we're still dealing with mostly hunter-gatherers here, and their agricultural capabilities were still pretty antiquated. So they upped and moved a lot of the time. They weren't staying at a camp for an entire year. It was more so a seasonal spot, probably looked at as some sort of vacation or sanctuary for them. And what better way to honor that sanctuary than by burying your loved ones near it? We did it. So thank you for joining me on this journey through the rich and fascinating world of the Adena culture. From their impressive earthworks to their intricate artifacts, the Adena people have left a legacy that continues to intrigue and inspire us today. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep exploring the wonders of history.